So welcome to New Orleans and welcome to Money Making Photography Secrets, How to Take Photos Editors Will Love. I'm Marc Pagani, and it says here, hold for wild applause. That was really heartfelt. That was beautiful. So how many of you are here from somewhere other than New Orleans? Majority do, great. Well, as you can tell, if you've been here for one night or 10 years, it's a pretty magical place. We call it the northernmost Caribbean city. There are obviously a ton of interesting things to photograph and write about here in New Orleans. Really interesting traditions, culture, great food, incredible music, and unique architecture. And before I get into the meat of my talk, let's take a look at just a few images from right here in New Orleans and talk briefly about how each one was shot. This one I call Booze Hound. This is on Mardi Gras Day in 2010. And when I shoot on Mardi Gras Day, I bring my own lighting source. It's made by Photo, and it's a reflector that has two speed lights. And a speed light is one of those lights you put on top of a strobe that you put on top of your camera, your larger DSLRs. So I have two of those things in there, and they're triggered remotely by a little radio control that's on top of my camera. So I can kind of put it anywhere, I can give it to somebody else, and it'll still trigger. And so even though we have sunlight here, it was a nice sunny day, I'm also using my own light source to increase the depth of the image.
What's it called?
This one is the costume is Booze Hound.
No, Gizmo.
The Gizmo, yes. So I use Nikon, a lot of people use Canon as well, and they both make speed lights. A speed light is just a strobe, it's a flash essentially, you put on top of your camera. And the radio that I use is made by a company called Radio Popper. It communicates with the flash and it puts out the right amount of flash. This is another example of that same kind of lighting technique where I've got the sun right behind his head and using the sun as a backlight and then using my own strobe as the main key light. This is also on Mardi Gras Day. This one is the Mardi Gras Indian has a huge tradition here in New Orleans called Super Sunday. All the Mardi Gras Indians come out on that day and parade. Each one of their costumes, every single little bead is all hand sewn. They worked on these costumes for the entire year. And this is one of the big chiefs of one of the Indian crews. And this is another example of using the sun as a backlight and using your own flash on the camera or just off the camera. This one is an example of using a unique angle. So this is also Mardi Gras Day, and I just raised my camera up over the leader of Panorama Brass Band. His name is Ben Shank. Lifted it up over his head, and so we get the clarinet and his hat in focus, and then everything else is kind of out of focus. And it just kind of gives you a sense of space and what it's like, the crowds, the craziness on Mardi Gras Day. A little bit of food photography. This one was shot with one of those speed lights. When I travel, I like to travel light, so I don't use a big studio lighting rig. I use the speed lights that are controlled by the Radio Popper. And so this is a combination of ambient light as well as a little bit of strobe in there too. And this particular one is in front of Preservation Hall. If anybody has been in the French Quarter, you might have seen Preservation Hall is where the Preservation Hall Jazz Band plays. Really beautiful facade. The doors are really strong compositional element in this image. And this was a couple that I was shooting that afternoon. And often when I shoot couples or just individuals, I ask them, couples especially, I ask them to talk to each other a little bit so they're not just very stiff and posed. They're actually interacting in that shoot as they talk. So that's kind of a key to a good portrait. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to talk about me because that's a fascinating subject. And
You didn't say your favorite subject.
exactly. So yeah, we'll talk about me, then we're going to talk about how we sell our images. I'm not going to be talking too much about how to get editors to buy your images and make contacts. That's all stuff that you can talk about in your writing courses too. This is more about how we make images that editors love. But we will talk a little bit about how where my income source is for travel photography. And then we'll go through a bunch of images and talk about individual image how-tos and critiques. How did I get that shot? Why is it a good shot? What do we need to get good shots? And then at the end, we'll do hopefully about 10 minutes of questions. And so if you have really intense questions that you have to ask about a specific image, you're welcome to raise your hand, but try to hold most of the questions for the end. So in 2011, I was hired by an expedition to climb a mountain called Pachermo in Nepal. And so I got on a plane, went up to Chicago, took another plane from Chicago to London, and on that flight, started smelling smoke. Tons of smoke in the cabin. A little scary, and the captain eventually, after about 2 hours of this, came on and said, we're experiencing a little bit of a problem here. You know, one of those, you know, really mellow, really calm captains. And he said, we've had a fire in the kitchen of the plane, so we had to turn around. And because we've only been in the air for about 2 hours, we have fuel to get all the way to London. When we land, we're going to be overweight. We're going to be too heavy to land. So there's a possibility that we might blow a tire. So they tell us this right when we're about to land. If you see emergency vehicles, that's because, you know, that kind of thing. And they put foam on the runway, and it was absolutely terrifying. And obviously I'm here, so it worked out. The next day I had to get back on a plane and try it again, and at that point I was thinking about turning around and going back to New Orleans. I had a really bad feeling leading up to this particular expedition. This is the first time I'd ever written a will, and you know, it was scary. So got back on the plane, flew to London, made it to Kathmandu okay. 2 days of preparation in Kathmandu for when we went out to Lukla airstrip, which is the main starting point of most Mount Everest expeditions. You fly from Kathmandu to Lukla, and then from Lukla there's no roads, there's nothing, so you have to walk about 9-10 days up to Mount Everest base camp. So we were on our way to Lukla, and we're in one of these little tiny planes, 13, 14 people, and we're heading towards this green mountain, and we just keep heading towards it, heading towards it, heading towards it. I'm thinking, okay, we're going to go over this mountain at some point. No, we're heading right towards it. So, because it's such a tiny plane, there's no announcements or anything. And the captain and the co-pilot are kind of fumbling with maps and things, and I'm like, okay, this is it. This is not good. So, second emergency landing. We had another emergency landing. So, this one was on the side of a mountain, absolutely terrifying again, and so my climbing partner and I, this is the plane, this is another plane that also had to land. The reason they had to land is because there was clouds over Lukla airstrip, and if there's clouds, you can't see the airstrip, there's no radar, you just can't land. So you have to find someplace else to land and wait for the clouds to dissipate. So that's us waiting there, and again, I got on the plane again, and was thinking, I'm gonna screw this, I'm gonna just walk there. But I got on the plane, and this is Lukla airstrip. The airstrip itself is angled like this, so when you land, gravity helps you stop, and then also when you're taking off, you pretty much drop off right into a mountain. I'm gonna move this mic over a little bit so you can hear me better. Here we go. So, yeah, it's a scary place. It's actually known as the world's most dangerous airport because of the number of crashes per flight. So we made it through. We got off the plane. We started our trek up to Pachermo base camp. When you're shooting an expedition like this, you're not just shooting the beautiful mountains, the obvious, the sunset, all that kind of stuff. You want to shoot things that tell a story. You want to get all the culture, the games that the kids are playing. Things like this, where a porter is carrying a refrigerator on his back on a bridge here. This shot would be cool just because there's a guy carrying a refrigerator on his back, right? But we want to kind of think compositionally, and so with the way the bridge is wider at the bottom and it goes towards the center, it brings your eyes right towards the subject. And we always want to be thinking about bringing eyes towards the subject. This is the shots. It was cloudy and rainy and really extended monsoon season this year. So lots of rain, and you're amongst the world's most beautiful mountains and you can't see them. That drives you crazy. But this is part of expedition photography. You can have 2 weeks where you don't see a mountain, but yet your editor is expecting tons of great mountain shots. So you have to be kind of like on it every moment. Anytime there's a little bit of sun, anytime there's a little bit of clearing, you got to get out there and shoot. So, but you could also make some great images with the clouds. This is kind of a misty, hazy day, and I slowed the shutter speed way down. On DSLRs, you can adjust the shutter speed, how fast the shutter opens and closes. And the longer the shutter is open, the more motion you get in the image. You're getting blur. So that's why the water there is kind of looking milky, because it was probably about a I would say, quarter of a second to half a second, maybe a full second exposure. Yeah, quick question.
I was just going to ask you what you're saying.
Yeah, it's when you're doing a slower shutter speed, that means more light is going to get into that camera sensor. So that means you have to close the aperture down quite a bit so that you don't overexpose the image. So slow shutter speed, small aperture on this one. And when you're using a small aperture, you have a greater depth of field. So pretty much everything from right in front of my feet all the way to that tree back there was all in focus. And for landscape stuff, that's often what you want. This is an image of the Sirdar, who's the leader of the climbing porters. And as you can see, he's standing in a totally shadowed area, right? We've got perfect exposure of the mountain in the background, but when you expose the mountain in the background for the right exposure, you're going to get shadow in the foreground area because there's not a lot of light. You can't have both. You can't have, if I would have made the shadow area much lighter, then the background would have been way overexposed. So I had to bring my own light. And again, I'm using the speed light on a stand with a little softbox, which is a lighting modifier that kind of softens the light. It's great for portraits. Super lightweight, light enough that I can carry up, up to 22,000 feet on a mountain. And so that's what is actually lighting his face on this image. This one is the morning before all the craziness happened. I'm using this one as an example mostly because my climbing partner is brushing his teeth over there. But if I hadn't waited until that cloud came behind him, he would have completely blended into the darker portion of the mountain down there, the portion that's not covered with snow. So a lot of times it's just about being patient and seeing a composition before you actually take the picture. Ansel Adams was always all about pre-visualization. So when I take a picture, I don't just walk up and take a snapshot. In my mind, I see what I want to see, and then if it's not there, sometimes I have to wait for it. Sometimes you have to wait for the right light, the right person to pass through the scene. So this one I waited just a second for that cloud to come, and it gave a nice silhouette. So this is after the avalanche. So yeah, we had 2 emergency landings, and then our high camp was demolished by an avalanche, and then it continued to avalanche all day. And this is because it had snowed and rained so much because the monsoon season was so late. We had a bunch of extra snow, and it was also pretty warm, and so all that snow kind of came off the side of the mountain because it wasn't frozen onto the mountain. And so all that detritus, all that rocks and stuff, that's all avalanche stuff. And we hid underneath this rock that's kind of in the center of the image all night and just kind of shivered our asses off, and it was scary. And our tent was completely covered in snow. Before I took this picture, I obviously got some snow on it.
You say your middle name's Lucky?
Yeah, that's my middle name is Lucky, yes. And so this is another shot of my climbing partner. Everything on the right-hand side is all the avalanche detritus. And again, the clouds coming up from below gave a nice silhouette to him. And then this is Namche Bazaar. So we couldn't climb the mountain because our high camp had been demolished, so it was time to climb down. So we did a really, really long hike all the way back to Namche Bazaar. We got there about 8 p.m. and we're sitting in a tea house, and all of a sudden things start moving and shaking. And this is true. This is all true. I'm not making this up. You can't make this stuff up. So pictures start falling from the wall. The glass breaking everywhere. Our food fell on the floor, and I realized, oh shit, this is an earthquake. So we go into the doorway because my climbing partner's from California. He says the doorways are the safest, but he's freaking out, So we stand in the doorway, and as we're standing there, 4 monks who had been staying upstairs at the tea house run by us and knock me over. So, the whole monks being really mellow and calm, and that didn't happen. So we're all hanging out, waiting in the street for the aftershocks to occur, and it was really, really terrifying, and it was one of those times where I was like, I'm not going to get out of this one. But again, I'm here, so obviously I did. Yeah. I have 9 lives, I think. So this is just outside the tea house. Everyone's holding their children close. This is right after the earthquake. And the one thing I did do when I was rushing out of that building was grab my camera bag, because that's I don't care about anything else. I just got that camera bag. So the next day, we did try to make it down. We heard that a bunch of the bridges were knocked out, but luckily only one of them was. And people had already started, adapting. They had already put a splint on this animal. So, and again, we're telling stories here. All these images tell a story. This one, if you just saw it by itself, you want to know more. And that's kind of the point of a good travel photograph, is seeing an image that either stands on its own as a beautiful image, or at least makes you want to see more images and learn about what's going on. So these guys were just hanging out, and they were daring each other to run across this bridge that had almost been demolished. And the bridge is about 1,000 feet above the Bodikosi River. And so, yeah, I just stood there hoping that I'm not going to be taking a picture of someone falling to their death. And it luckily worked out that way. And so my book is Fearless Photographer Travel. That particular picture was shot on one of the small windows of time that we had, that there was there were clouds, but not too bad. And I think the point of all this story I'm telling you is that you go through a lot of weird stuff sometimes on these trips. I'm sure people have had the Montezuma's Revenge in Mexico, and had bad flights and luggage lost and mosquito bites that lasted forever, and all these things are all part of traveling. And this whole experience, I on the one hand I was thinking, why the hell did I go on this trip? I didn't get to summit the mountain. I only got a few shots that I really love. But this is the first chapter of my book, so you never know what's good can come from kind of crazy failed expeditions. And so these are some of the main reasons I like to travel and do what I do for a living. I experience new things, I see new sights, meet interesting people, and actually live a real live adventure. So let's talk about what makes a great photo. A great photo tells a story, as I mentioned before. It's technically correct, and that means that it is properly exposed. It is in focus, it has good composition, it has nice light. We see hundreds and hundreds of thousands of I don't know, I think it was like 2.6 million or billion, I don't even know how many images are uploaded to Facebook and Instagram every day. The majority of these images are shot with an iPhone or camera phone and by an amateur, and they're not great. So we see kind of crappy photos all the time, and so we want to stand above that as travel photographers, as travel writers. So learn the craft, learn how to work your camera, learn the ins and outs, learn how to use it on manual as well as dummy mode, fully programmed, whatever. You want a photo to be visually interesting and compelling. It needs to tell a story, it needs to be correct, but it also needs to be something that you want to see, you want to have up on your wall maybe. It can stand alone, and it also can make you want to know more. So just a little bit about me, because I'm sure you want to know my dog's names and where I had my first kiss and all that stuff. So I'm going to find that. So I started out, I've been shooting for 22 years. Started out as a pro photographer, full-time. I've been a pro photographer full-time for 15 years. I've been shooting for 22 years. I had my first assignment 16 years ago in Nepal. I started out by teaching myself photography. This is back in the film days. Learned how to work in a darkroom just by reading a book. Where I worked had a really nice darkroom facility, and I had access to all the film and paper and chemicals that I wanted, so that was pretty awesome. So I got a lot of experience that way. Eventually got a job at the Environmental Protection Agency in Chicago, and they sent me out to California to learn web design and graphic design, and I was also doing photography for them. So that led to me building my first website in about 1999. I also started shooting weddings in 1997, first as an assistant, and then as a second shooter, meaning I would go out with the main photographer and do some shooting as well. And eventually I started working for somebody as the main shooter under his name. And after that, I stopped working for him and went on my own as a wedding photographer. I assisted a Life magazine photographer as well and did a bunch of traveling with him. And right about this time in 2000 is when I went on my first expedition, which was in Nepal. I was hired by a trekking company. And it was an amazing experience. I was there for a month in Nepal and Tibet. Got really sick and did all the things you do in Nepal. And saw a lot of great mountains and got a lot of great images. I continue to do the travel photography. That is where I kind of, the bug bit me in 2000. And I won the Prix de la Photographie in Paris in 2008 for some of my mountaineering images. And then in 2012, I wrote the book. And this is an image from Chamonix, France. We're paragliding above Mont Blanc.
Oh, yeah.
And that's an amazing experience. But that's just another reason why photography is so great. It takes me to some really cool places. So why do I love travel photography? My camera takes me to places I would have never been otherwise. When I'm sitting in a tiny little room in Vietnam with a family who invited me in because there's no tourist infrastructure up close to the Chinese border, and he's pouring me this hooch out of a Sprite bottle, and we're all saying "chuk chuk kway," which means to your health, and I'm eating fried bees and stuff like that. I'm thinking to myself, this is an amazing experience. I would have never had this experience if I didn't have photography in my life. So it's an opportunity to experience some really cool stuff. It's a creative outlet. Any job that you can create your own stuff is a cool job, I think. You get paid to travel, which doesn't suck. And you are your own boss, and you have freedom. So that means you can live pretty much wherever you want. I used to live in Chicago. I moved down here in 2003, and I could live in Colorado. I could live in California, pretty much anywhere, and have that freedom and have the ability to travel. So let's talk a little bit about. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anything? Good. Let's talk a little bit about travel image income options. So there's stock photography, there's editorial assignment photography. I often will pitch a shoot, and then I'll do self-assignments where I will sell the images afterwards via stock photography. So let's talk a little bit about each one of those. One of my agencies is Aurora Photos, and this is what it looks like when I'm online uploading images to the site. You can see there's different categories here. Some of the images are royalty-free, and some of them are rights managed, and these are all active images. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like when you're actually working with a stock agency. This is what the consumer will see when they look for my images on the stock photography website. And if you're not familiar with what stock photography is, it's just basically a gathering of a bunch of different photographers, a bunch of different images, and you can search via a keyword just like you can on Google, and then you can buy the images for your own use, whether it's for advertising, commercial use, your own personal use to print, and depending on what the usage is how much you're going to get for the image. So I've had images that have sold to Getty Images, which is another agency, and then they resell them. I've had images sell for $2,000. I've had images sell for $50. So it just depends on what usage they're using them for. When you're doing travel photography, when you're traveling in general, if you have the opportunity to get a model release for any humans that are in your image, that's a great idea. There's an app called, I think it's just called Release, that you can take a picture of your model, you can get all their information, you can get their address and kind of get their permission. Those images sell better because advertisers can use them in pretty much any capacity that they like. And if you're working on a private property, get a property release if you can, because then you can sell those images for more as well. And then this is what it looks like every time I upload an image. So doing stock photography takes a lot of time because you have to enter all this information for each image. Caption, keyword, headline, date shot, location, state, country, model age, all that kind of stuff. And so each image takes me anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to upload. So it takes a while. If you've gone, on a trip and you have 1,000 images to upload, it's going to take some time. So that's stock photography. And then you have editorial assignments. I use this photo in particular because this was my first real editorial assignment. It was for a Danish magazine called Adventure World, and it was about California. So the entire issue of that particular magazine was about California. Tons of different images, and I also got to write the story for this one too. So editorial assignments are not as common these days. People are less likely to send people out on assignment, cost them money when they can instead use stock photography. So diversifying your abilities there, is good. And then pitching a shoot, so the Vietnam shoot that I did, I wanted to go to Vietnam. And I wanted to rock climb, I wanted to sea kayak, I wanted to travel quite a bit. And so I contacted different outfitters that do these things. There's only one company that does rock climbing in Vietnam. It's on Cat Ba Island. So I contacted them via email, sent them a link to my website, specifically all the rock climbing images. And I said, okay, take me climbing for 2 or 3 days. You'll pay all my expenses for climbing, where I stay, at night and everything, and guide me. And in exchange, and also give me a small stipend, a small salary. In exchange, you'll get all the images that I shoot while I'm doing this. And I did that with rock climbing. I did it with the sea kayaking. We went on a traditional junk, which is a traditional Vietnamese boat, and spent 4 days doing that. So if you have interest, if you like skydiving, if you like mountain biking, whatever it is that you're into, and you want to travel somewhere to do it, contact people that are outfitters there and see if they'd be interested in having you shoot. So that first image that you just saw, that was shot with a slow shutter speed. So I wanted to get motion of the motorcycle. I saw motorcycles going by, and I stood there for about 20 minutes waiting for another one to come. And in the meantime, I set my camera to have a slow shutter speed so we'd see the motion in that motorcycle. This one was in the Dong Van market. I talked to this guy through an interpreter. I had a driver and an interpreter on this trip, and I talked to him for a little while about his little boy and why he was there, what he sold in the market. And as I walked away, I waved to him, and he waved back and gave me this big smile, and I just thought that was great. This particular image makes me happy every time I see it.
Did you need a model release for something like that?
Yeah, I got a model release for this. Yeah, obviously, if I'm just using it for my own personal, using it in a slideshow like this, or printing it, putting it on my wall, it doesn't matter. But if I want to sell it and have it used for advertising, especially, that's when I need a model release. This is in Hanoi. Shooting at night can be a challenge. You're dealing with a lot of different kind of lighting, and I like this one just because it has 3 headlights, and you can see the light on each of the rider's face. And again, this projector is not giving you the full contrast range and color that you get, in actual images, but you get the idea. This one is really strong graphically. This one has sold quite a bit. This is in Ha Long Bay in Vietnam, and it seems like it has to be black and white. This is just so, white against black silhouette. And this is just one of those situations where you're shooting as you're in the boat, you're going along, and you look up and you see that kind of perfect place. And I probably shot 10 or 15 images, and this is my favorite of those images. So a little bit wider angle lens, and using probably a smaller aperture, so you get a lot of depth of field, so that the stuff in the background is also in focus. This is on my way to go rock climbing. Just was on the back of a motorcycle. He was taking me back deep into the jungle where we were climbing, and I just kind of stood up on the motorcycle and used a really wide angle lens, so they got the whole road and the helmet. This is the kind of image that makes you want to know a little more. Kind of tells a little bit of the story. And this image with all the other images together make a cohesive, interesting story. That's a little rock climbing. The guy on the ground is the guy who runs the climbing facility, and the woman who's climbing is from Thailand, great climber. Obviously, to get this kind of image, you have to climb up first. Shots of rock climbers' butts from below, not so interesting. I mean, unless you're really into that. So this kind of stuff is a little more specialized because you actually have to know how to rock climb to get the shot in the first place. So this one is on the Mekong River in Ho Chi Minh City, well, close to Ho Chi Minh City. And I just like this one because you don't see the person's face, and kind of, for me, it makes me want to know more. Where are we going? Who's the guy that's guiding us? Are we lost? All that, those kind of questions all come up. And this is just a real simple, this is all just ambient light. There's no crazy, interesting technique involved here. But this is definitely an example of picking your composition. I could have gotten back a little bit and shot him fully standing, but I got this instead. So then the last one is self-assignment. So similar to the pitching a shoot, it's when you decide you want to go somewhere and you are connected with a stock photography agency or some outlet that you know that you can sell images to. So I went to Iceland, I wanted to go there for a long time. Spent a couple weeks driving around the whole country and just shooting. And this is the Blue Lagoon near Reykjavik. And This is in Skidadalur Valley. The mountain in the very back is called Hollenjuker, and we climbed that mountain. I contacted the only certified mountain guide in all of Iceland and told him that I wanted to shoot for him and asked him if he would guide me. And in exchange for a place to stay for a few nights and guiding, we went and climbed this mountain. In exchange for that, I gave him all the images. And he uses them still to this day on his website. That's on that climb. This is shot with a fisheye lens. So sometimes when you're in really kind of close quarters, even a wide angle won't do. You need a super, super wide angle. So this is fisheye, and with this fisheye, you get the entire length of the guy climbing here, and you can also see so much more of the mountain as well. And then again, these are all things that editors want to see. They want things that are visually interesting. They want things that tell a story and are a little out of the ordinary. This is on that same climb. This one sells well in particular because there's no faces. I didn't get model releases for these two climbers, and I don't have to worry about model releases because there's no faces in the image. And then on the far left-hand side, you can see the shadow. So I composed it so that we also included the shadow of the climber so you kind of see how big the mountain is. And you can see the footprints all the way down there leading up. That's just a wild horse in Iceland. And this one was purchased by a nonprofit that's working in climate change. And I just picked up a piece of ice at a glacier there. I think it's called the Skaftakal Glacier. And I was kind of concerned about how melty everything was around there. And so, yeah, so that one, that's just an example of taking a step further. So let's go through some images. We've already been doing this, but let's go through some images and talk specifically about the individual images. What we want to focus on each image is all of these things here. So subject matter, super important. If it's a boring image, if it's an image of nothing, if it's the image of back of someone's head, it's not going to sell. Interesting subject matter. Composition, so how you frame the image. Is the person on the far left? Are they in the middle? Are they bullseye right in the center? All those kinds of things. Compositional elements are key. Exposure and lighting, and again, we're going to be talking about all this stuff as we go through the images. Exposure and lighting, getting the proper exposure and using interesting lighting. And sometimes that means you're going to have to use your own lighting, as I showed you in the image of the porter on the mountain. Focus. An out-of-focus image won't sell. It's just the way it goes. Lens choice. So are you going to use a long lens, telephoto? Are you going to use a wide angle lens, a medium? All these things come into play, and as we go through the images, I'll show you why I used the different images or different lenses that I did. Shutter speed. Slow shutter speed gives you that blur, and sometimes you want that movement in your image. Fast shutter speed you're going to need if you're shooting action, if you're shooting a horse race, you get an assignment to go to the Kentucky Derby. You're going to want fast shutter speed. Depth of field and aperture choice. Depth of field refers to what is in focus and what's not in focus. When you're shooting a portrait, it's great to have really limited depth of field. That means you can use a large aperture. You want limited depth of field because you want the subject of your portrait to stand out against the blurry background. If you use a smaller aperture and a great depth of field, everything's going to be in focus and the subject will blend into the background. Lastly, is it compelling? Is it unique? Is it special? That's what we always want when we're editing, when we're going through our images afterwards. Yeah, it might be a pretty image, but is it really unique? Is it special? Or is it something that somebody who pulled up to the side of the Grand Canyon, stepped out of the car, took a picture and stepped back in? We don't want that. We need more because that image is not going to sell because everybody has that image.
Mark?
Yep.
When you were talking earlier about model releases, now this may seem like a really silly question, but you just mentioned the Kentucky Derby.
Yep.
If you're taking pictures of famous animals like a horse, okay, do you have to get the owners to sign off?
I would think you would. I haven't shot that, but I would think you would, especially since they're in a commercial endeavor. They're money makers. It's almost like celebrities in that sense. I've done a lot of stuff with Brad Pitt down here in 2012, 2014, and I had to sign all these, non-disclosure agreements and couldn't use the images for anything. So it's kind of like that, I think. Yeah. So let's get into some images. This one was shot in Bolivia. This is on a mountain called Iamani. This is base camp at Iamani. And the mountain that's in the center is the summit of Iamani. And to get this shot, took me about an hour, hour and a half. I froze my fingers off. It was very cold up there, and I had to hold the shutter on my camera without a pair of gloves on. But it worked, and I think the exposure is probably about 3 or 4 minutes long. And we get the Milky Way. And obviously I'm using a tripod. That's key. If you're going to do any night photography, you're going to want a tripod. And I have a camp lantern inside my tent that lights it up from the center. But since we did such a long exposure, the tent is a little bit overexposed. So we just had to burn that down a little bit in post-production.
So did you have a shutter release?
For my camera, I did not. Yes, I forgot. Okay, that's what happened. I tried to get away with it, but no, I forgot it. But yeah, I usually do have a shutter release. And they make electronic ones too, that you can pre-program, so you don't have to stand there and freeze your fingers off. I did not very much. So this one is in Banff, Lake Louise. I was shooting skiers, ski jumpers. And again, this is shot about 3, 4 p.m. And it's obviously, hopefully you can tell that it's a fast shutter speed, the way that the snow is just kind of frozen in the air there. And even though it's shot during the middle of the day, I wanted a little bit more edginess to the lighting. So I brought up a big ProPhoto 2400 watt second power pack that we lugged up the side of the mountain and set up a big light there. And so on the edge of his arm, towards the left there, you can see the light, and that's coming from that ProPhoto. So adding your own light often makes things more interesting and a lot more depth. What's that?
What happened to his head? Where's his head?
Oh, his head sees down like this in the top. Yeah. when you see these images up closer, you can kind of tell like that. So this is on Mount Baker. This is 6 climbers. When we climb mountains, usually we start really, really early, like between midnight and 2 a.m., so that we're on the summit by 7, 8 a.m., so that we're coming back down when it's still cold. If you come down in the late afternoon and it's been sunny all day, it's a much bigger chance you fall into a crevasse. So we start really early, and this is just before the sun rose, and I just saw this, and this took a few shots to get right, just getting the right exposure. You don't want to do too long of an exposure that you get too much of a blur. So yeah, this is another shot where lighting is key. If we had 6 climbers without their headlamps, it would not be nearly as interesting a shot. And this one sells really well. I've sold this to a couple of climbing magazines. This is in Kathmandu. This is Bodhanath Temple, and I'm going to go a little quicker because I want to make sure we have enough time. I realize we're getting late here. So I like this one in particular because I took a bunch of shots, and this one is the one that the pigeon was right in front of that temple, and it just really stands out and gives it more interesting. It's more interesting as it gives it more depth. This is one of the ones that won the Grand Prix de la Photographie in Paris. Again, beautiful shot of a mountain. You know, mountains are easy to shoot because they're beautiful, but when you add the 2 climbers down at the bottom there, it makes it much more interesting. And it gives you a sense of scale. So anytime you're shooting mountains, anytime you're shooting something really big, if you can include a person in the shot, that gives you a good sense of scale. This was shot with a 24-70 lens from up really high. This is here in New Orleans. A couple came down and they hired me to hire a brass band, and they did a second line parade for their engagement photo. So this is a travel photo in the sense that they came and traveled down here, and it's in New Orleans. It's a travel destination. I hired 3 assistants to hold lights for me. So we've got 3 different light sources, and it gives, as you can see on their face, there's light coming from the left, and on the tuba player's face, there's light coming from the right, and there's another one behind. So getting a lot of light into an image from different angles really gives images great depth. Another example of that, this is during a Mardi Gras parade in New Orleans, And I actually clamped a flash, one of those speed lights, onto a stop sign on the opposite side of the street. And so that's why you see all those shadows there, because there's a super bright light on the other side. And I'm triggering that with my camera. And I've got that radio popper on top of my camera, as well as a strobe on top of my camera. So I'm lighting from this direction. I'm also getting light from the other direction. And this one was in my gallery show in January, and sold really well as well. This is Kasani Mackenzie in Jamaica. And this is an example of getting the perfect exposure for the sunset. If you do the proper exposure for the sunset, the subject is going to be pretty dark, right? Because it's a relatively dark scene. So that's why you have to add that light. So again, this is one of those speed lights with a softbox on it on a stand, and that's lighting my subject. Doing a little bit of experimentation, taking a few photos of this scene without the subject in it to get the proper exposure for the sunset is really important. And then you add the subject and you add that light as well. Just a kind of a funky version of the Eiffel Tower. This one sells really well just because it's weird, you know. So taking some chances is always fun. Shooting from different angles, shooting weird things, you never know. Again, you always see the Eiffel Tower as a very erect structure, and I thought the idea of kind of shooting it from below would be kind of cool. And this one is shot with a fisheye, and it's also on a tripod, so we have plenty of time to get a good exposure.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The one with the Eiffel Tower and the cowboy boots,
Yep.
you said it sells well.
Yep.
Is that to stock or is
Yeah,
that to?
stock, and I don't always know who buys. You know, I mean, I get my statement that tells me what agencies buy, but I don't always know what they're used for. You know, so that's one kind of weird thing about stock photography. No, the agency does. Yeah. This is also in Paris, just a fun day. It's really nice sun, late afternoon sun. Shooting at the kind of the golden hours really is important. So just before and just after sunrise, and just before and just after sunset are the best times to shoot in general if you want interesting light. A little bit of food in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. That's some mofongo. When you're shooting food, it's often helpful to use a longish lens, so maybe anything 50 millimeters and longer, and get nice and close to the food itself and use a large aperture so that you get limited depth of field. So just one part of the food is in focus and everything else kind of goes out of focus. This is in Fajardo, Puerto Rico. So this is a bioluminescent bay. There's all these flagellates in the bay, and they're little animals. And when you agitate the water, they turn blue. So if you have a dark enough night, this wasn't a super dark night, but if you have a dark enough night and you're kayaking, you put your paddle in, and this sold to a kayaking magazine, and it's slightly out of focus, it's slightly soft, but it's just the overall, sometimes it does work to have, I mean, I said, you know, it's always got to be focused, but this is the one image that kind of breaks that rule. That's the Grand Tetons. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, just so we have some time for question and answers. This is the Tour de France, and again, this is an image where I use the slow shutter speed, small aperture, and slow shutter speed so we get the movement of the cyclist. I call this one the sea of color. And this also has some really strong compositional elements in that you have what they call the rule of thirds. The lower portion, the white and red, is 1/3, then the cyclist is the middle third, and then all the spectators is the upper third. So dividing your image into different sections is always a nice idea too. We'll tell that whole story. So this is purchased by Climbing Magazine. It's my climbing partner's hands after a long day of climbing. And so, you know, when you think of rock climbing photos, you think of, you know, the crazy hanging off the side of the wall, but shooting everything all day is key. And that goes for all travel photography. Shooting the back of your cab driver's head, maybe that's interesting. You know, maybe somebody wants to see that. Maybe somebody wants to get a feel of what it's like to be inside a cab in Bangkok, Thailand. So shooting little things like this gives a lot of nice detail and tells you a lot about what's going on. This is the Cape Fur Seal in South Africa, near Cape Town. Totally different kind of photography. Underwater is you got to have specialized equipment. This was shot with an underwater housing on my Nikon with 2 big strobes. Obviously, you need to know how to scuba dive. So there's a lot more to underwater photography. But just thinking about the fact that even if you go snorkeling and you have one of those little cameras, adding some light, if you can get a little camera that has a little flash on it, that's key, because underwater you need that extra light to give color, because the sun can't get through all the denseness of the water. So if you add your own light, you get much better color. This is really shallow. This is probably like 8 feet. That's an ibex in the Stellenbosch wine region of South Africa. That's shot with a really long lens, so I'm obviously far away from it, but it looks like I'm right there. And that's because I'm using a long lens, and the longer the lens you use, the more out of focus the background goes, which separates the subject from the background. So using a large aperture and a long lens in a situation like this when you're shooting wildlife is really key. The red dunes of Sossusvlei in Namibia, including a couple people climbing up, is another one of those kind of give you a depth of scale, a sense of scale. A couple outfits. It took forever to get these guys to pose just like that. It was like an all-day thing. But yeah, they made the perfect little heart with their tusks.
With the feet.
Yeah, and with their feet. So this is another example of just shooting. I was there for about 5 hours, just shooting all afternoon. And you know, I probably shot 1,500 images, and of those, I think maybe 30 of them are on my stock photography agency site. So patience is key. That's also shot with a long lens, by the way. You can't get too close to elephants.
Do you mind me asking which lens you use?
This is a 70-200, and then this particular image I did not use, but you can use. I also have a 2x2x doubler. So that will make the lens 140 to 400 millimeter. The quality suffers a little bit when you put those doublers on. I also have a 300 millimeter lens, f2.8, that weighs about 500 pounds, and I didn't bring it on this particular trip because I was moving around a lot. So this is just an example of really nice reflection. This is at sunset, and this is the watering hole at Etosha National Park in Namibia. And just getting moving around quite a bit, getting a little bit higher, a little bit lower to make sure that you get just the right shot is key here. And as long as those giraffes are going to be there for a while, why not spend some time working on getting the right shot rather than just walking up, oh, the cool reflection, and walk away. Take your time. And then including a little bit of element, going a little wider. That other image was shot with the long lens. This one's shot with a wide angle lens, including some of the tree from above, but you still have the reflection of the animals down there. This one's just really minimalist. They all happen to be just almost perfectly spaced. I spent about 2 hours shooting these birds, and then these three fly by. And again, long lens, being conscious of shutter speed, because when the birds are flying by, we don't want them to be all blurred. We want them to be sharp and in focus. The little guy, sometimes getting down low. You don't have to get on your stomach and get right there, but you can actually put your camera down and shoot a bunch when you have your camera down low, because you're not sure what is going to be in focus. So you have to shoot, kind of move the camera around a little bit and keep shooting, and hopefully one of those will have a nice sharp focus. And then this is in Dedvlei in Namibia. Really, really crazy, otherworldly place. This one is shot with a medium focal length, and I'm using a relatively small aperture, so everything all the way back stays in focus. So if you want to get in touch with me, there's my website, there's my Instagram and Facebook page. Go ahead and write that down. I'm wide open, to questions today, tomorrow, a year from now. I'd like to answer questions, and that's what we're going to do right now for a few minutes, if we have time. Do we have time?
We have time. We have time to take probably a couple questions.
Okay.
As soon as I hear the other rooms are out.
Okay, and I'm going to stick around. I'm doing another one of these for the next hour, and I'm going to stick around for a little bit after that. So if you're around and you have another question, feel free to come up. That was the first hand up.
When you're going out on a shoot and you know that you're going to probably need more than one lens,
Yeah.
do you recommend just having 2 cameras?
It depends on the type of shoot. If I'm doing a mountaineering expedition where weight is really, really important, then no. But if I'm doing anything else, yeah, I'll bring 2 camera bodies. I won't necessarily take 2 camera bodies. If I'm walking around in an area that's kind of iffy, I'm not going to take a ton of equipment. I'm going to probably take 1 body and 2 lenses, which would probably be a medium focal length of 24-70 and maybe a long, so that I can shoot people from farther away. But yeah, it's 2 bodies is ideal, and especially if you're shooting action, things where you need to shoot wide and then instantly shoot a long lens, you don't have time to switch your lens. You got to just pull up the other camera. When I'm shooting the Tour de France, I bring 3 cameras with me. So, yep.
When shooting parts of the person, like you had somebody's boots, or you
Yep.
had somebody's hair, but you didn't have their face, do you still need their permission?
No, you don't. The only time you need model release is if the actual face is showing.
And Mark, can you just clarify that it's needed for stock, but
It's
not
needed,
for
yes. I
editorial?
mean, if you're just going to use these for your own to show your friends or put on Facebook, you can do it. Those are all called editorial images, and if somebody's out in public, they're fair game to be shot. It's only if you're using them for stock photography, and then that's usually advertising.
So for selling to magazines, like we've been talking about this weekend, you're okay to use photos that have people in them?
In general, it just depends. Yeah, editorial is usually fine. Yeah. Yep.
What size data card do you use?
I currently have 64 gigabyte. They make bigger ones, they make smaller ones. I don't like to bring a ton of cards. I've never had a serious card failure, and my cameras have 2 slots. So if one, and the second one is backing up the first one. So if one fails, I've always got a backup. Some people like to use like really small cards because they're worried, oh, I don't want to put all my stuff on one card because what if I lose it? Or what if it, fails? I'm kind of in the middle there. It's usually 64 gigabyte. Yep.
I'm just kind of curious how much time you spend in post-production with your photo.
Yeah, how much time do I spend in post-production? It just depends on the image. My selects, the images that I actually want to put on the stock agency or sell, or their assignment images, it just depends on the image. It could be anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, per image. So, yeah.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Yep.
When you are in mountainous cold climate and various temperature changes, how do you prevent your lens from bugging up?
You can't really. I mean, the only time it fogs up for me is actually the opposite. When I'm in the Caribbean, I do a lot of shoots in the Caribbean, and you're in air-conditioned room like this, and then you go out into a really humid environment. You got to just go out. You have to go out 5 minutes before the shoot starts, and just make sure that you're keeping it dry and all that kind of stuff. I don't have too much issue with that in the high altitude mountain area stuff.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you so much.